This rectangle pond is located in the middle of a dense forest, less than 10 miles from the southern edge of the Grand Canyon. Every day, a huge amount of water is pumped here, which is sprayed into the air above the pond using land sharks, water cannons designed to speed up evaporation. These cannons shoot water high into the air and don't really interest regular people, well, maybe a little. And only those who know feel uneasy because they understand the pond is filled with radioactive water. Very, very radioactive. The federal standard for drinking water is 30 parts per billion of dissolved uranium, but this water has 130 parts of uranium, over 4 times higher than the norm. And this poisoned water is also sprayed over the surface of the pond. Yes, the area around the water body is fenced off, but the water itself isn't covered in any way, which means animals and birds living in the forest can easily access it, and such contact with radioactive water just can't end well. But what if I told you that there isn't just one contaminated pond in Arizona, not 2, not even 10, but more than several hundred? And this particular pond appeared in a place where such construction is strictly prohibited. Well, let's figure it out. Hold on a second, I'll just make some coffee. Meanwhile, here's an unobtrusive reminder to hit the like button. This is for those who usually do it. So to start with, a simple but troubling fact. In the US, trucks regularly drive around filled with radioactive water. You could be just driving down the highway and not realize that right in front of you is a tanker full of poison. One news report states that more than 130 truckloads of contaminated water were transported this way. Where are they going? To a better spot for holding radioactive water. As the retention pond became full, people began using water pumps and trucks to keep it from overflowing. It's known that the water being transported by trucks is contaminated by the Energy Fuels Uranium Mine. It's being transported through Navajo to another Energy Fuel site, the White Mesa Uranium Mill, not far from Blanding, Utah. And it's not really a fundamentally different place for storage. This is how it looks. Same pond, only bigger. The situation with the number of trucks is quite unclear. If there were only 130 in total, that might be acceptable. But if there were 130 during a specific period, the problem could be much more serious than it initially seems. The same goes for the issue with uranium mines. What you see now isn't a natural hill, it's a pile of waste left over from uranium mining. In fact, uranium mining has a long history of contaminating soil, water, and consequences to which that contamination leads. First and foremost, of course, the primary issue is diseases in people. Mines are developed, and then when the work stops, they're left abandoned, waiting for cleanup. For a long time, companies mined millions of tons of uranium all over Navajo land and beyond to meet the demand for nuclear weapons during the Cold War. And although the Cold War ended, no one really took care of fixing the consequences of all this mining. The water sources were polluted, and what they tried to clean, they cleaned poorly. Since then, problems with uranium have been haunting the indigenous people living in Arizona and New Mexico. A lot of them live close to uranium mine tailings and are always exposed to polluted water and soil. On the Navajo Nation, next to the Havasupai, there are over 500 abandoned uranium mining sites. It's no surprise that from the 1970s to the 1990s, cancer rates in this area doubled. I mean, the overall cancer rate here is 40% higher than in the rest of Arizona. And where there are frequent cases of cancer, deaths are common too, and it's all because of uranium exposure. Uranium mining is already a dangerous, dirty process with a lot of waste. Usually, miners store this waste in special ponds, but it remains radioactive. This is what I showed you at the beginning of the video, a pond with a lot of contaminated water that's already spilling out, so they spray it with cannons to make it evaporate faster. Naturally, environmentalists are worried that the radioactive water from these cannons might travel through the air and end up in the habitat of plants and animals in the national forest. In 2005, the Navajo Nation banned uranium mining across their vast reservation, pointing out the problems caused by uranium. But unfortunately, colossal damage had already been done. It seems that uranium extraction always means environmental damage. Here's just one example. In 2016, drilling by the company Energy Fuels pierced shallow aquifers, leading to the release of contaminated water. They started putting the water into a pond we're already familiar with, but by 2017, its capacity was no longer enough. And what did the miners do? They just dumped the contaminated water into the nearby Kaibab National Forest, and nothing seemed to bother them. Miners also sprayed water on the ground to deal with dust and let birds and other wild animals drink, bathe, and feed in the polluted storage pond on the company's property. Again, no doubt about it. And that's not all. In 1979, at the uranium plant in Church Rock, New Mexico, there was a leak of 12 million cubic feet of radioactive liquid. But the situation didn't attract much public attention. It's incredibly strange knowing what the consequences were, so at that plant, uranium ore mined from the mine was processed. The waste was stored in large basins surrounded by huge earthen dams. But the acid was corroding the walls, and the ground they were built on was unstable. Perfect conditions for a disaster. And then on July 16, 1979 at 5:30 a.m., the disaster happened and the dam collapsed. The waste poured straight into the river. Witnesses of these events remember the terrible smell and yellowish color of the water. But the color and smell were the least of the problems. People who tried to cross the river ended up with sores, blisters, and burns on their feet and legs. Waste also clogged the sewage system, and the level of radioactivity in the water, soil, and air jumped sharply. And by sharply, I mean that the radioactivity level in the river right after the dam failure was 6,000 times the safe limit. 6,000! But many of the residents didn't realize that their wells, springs, and swimming pools were contaminated. Kids even played in this water. And yet, despite everything, the U.S. is opening a new uranium mine. On January 8, 2024, uranium ore extraction began here. The site is located 7 miles south of the Grand Canyon National Park. Over the past 8 years, this is one of the first mines opened in the country. It's expected that the Pinyon Plain mine will produce 712 tons of uranium. A mining company plans to drill a 1,476-foot deep well to extract high-quality uranium ore and then transport it 249 miles to its processing plant in Utah. Obviously, this mine has a lot of opponents because developing it involves many risks. Just look at it. The Grand Canyon, shaped by the Colorado River over the past 6 million years, is one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. Nearly 6 million people visit this place every year just to take in the view. And besides that, there's plenty more to see since the canyon supports 5 different ecosystems and is home to almost 600 different species. And all this unique splendor is under serious threat. First of all, the Pinyon Plain uranium mine threatens the waters that feed the Grand Canyon. The thing is, the process of contaminating groundwater is irreversible. There simply is no way to clean it up. The longer uranium mining continues, the more groundwater sources it'll threaten. These sources feed biologically important springs and streams in the Grand Canyon, and with them, the local plants, animals, and birds. Everything will be affected. Also, as we've already figured out, the mine leaves behind radioactive water, which is dumped into a special retention pond. This water contains concentrations of dissolved uranium and arsenic that exceed federal toxicity limits by 300% to 2,800%. Ecologists are justifiably worried that this waste might reach groundwater sources, and that would be a genuine catastrophe. Nobody knows where the contaminated water would go if a leak happened. Besides, this area already has a lot of abandoned mines that could pose a threat to water quality. There's no point in adding another reason for concern. There are plenty already. Uranium extraction might, for example, contaminate the Colorado River, the trout living in it, and this, in turn, will harm the iconic predatory birds, bald eagles, which feed on trout. Not to mention that radioactive contamination in the Colorado River will affect the water supply for millions of people. To be more precise, the lives of 40 million people living downstream. The indigenous people living here are also against the new mine, and their arguments are very simple. Essentially, uranium mining forces people to choose, destroy their ancient way of life by leaving the canyon, or stay and become sick. And that's, by the way, 767 members of the Havasupai tribe. For thousands of years, they farmed in the canyon during the summer, and in the fall and winter, they moved up to the plateau to focus on hunting and gathering. But since the 1880s, the Havasupai have been systematically pushed off the plateau, and now uranium mines are doing the same. The new mine is located right under Red Butte, a sacred place for the Havasupai and other local tribes who, by the way, have been opposing mining in the area for generations. Red Butte, including the deposit, has the right to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places as traditional cultural property. It's no surprise, since there are more than 10 indigenous tribes for whom this place holds sacred meaning. To give you an idea of the scale, according to the history of the tribe's creation, life began right here. Once, this used to be the center of ceremonies and prayers, but now tribe members rarely visit it because of uranium. It poisons not just a sacred place. The mine is located on top of an aquifer that feeds the waterfalls of the Havasupai tribe. The people have no other sources of drinking water, and any contamination will just ruin their already compromised health. And the main thing is that even if you immediately close the new mine, it'll still keep posing a threat to groundwater for a very, very long time. But if it's such an important place, a national monument, why did they even open a mine there? Turns out it was due to a bureaucratic loophole. The national monument status imposes a permanent ban on new mining applications and development within the monument, but if the mining application was submitted earlier and permission was granted, then it's all legal. Follow the thought. Ancestral footprints of the Grand Canyon National Monument was designated as a monument relatively recently, on August 8, 2023. 11 years earlier, in 2012, a moratorium was imposed on new uranium mining claims in the region surrounding the Grand Canyon. The moratorium is set to last until 2032. However, work on the Pinyon Plain mine started before the 2012 ban. You can't ban something that was allowed before the ban was introduced. Besides, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality said that pollution of the Grand Canyon aquifers by the mine is virtually impossible. They even have arguments to back it up. According to research results, thick layers of low permeability rock and the absence of faults and cracks around the mining site should protect the main aquifer. Groundwater won't be affected, and everyone seems to be happy. It's just that a new study just came out recently, and it showed a completely different picture. Now, environmentalists believe that the permit for the mine was granted based on incorrect scientific assumptions. Besides, the lands surrounding the Grand Canyon have the highest quality uranium in the United States. Uranium is in demand for nuclear energy production, meaning it's always needed. You can't just pick another spot where your mines won't bother anyone. This very area contains 1.3% of the U.S. uranium reserves. In February 2024, some lawmakers in Arizona filed a lawsuit challenging the monument status. They claim the monument is too big and would unjustifiably limit mining and ranching in the area. All of this happened as the U.S. aimed to boost domestic mining of the mineral needed for nuclear energy and speed up the transition away from fossil fuels. Is this such a good idea? It's up to you to decide. Neighbors are keeping up. Uranium mining companies in Wyoming are getting ready for a possible major expansion of operations. This comes as prices are rising. Spot prices for uranium in January surpassed $92, the highest in 17 years. Price hikes definitely have their reasons, a whole range of factors, including supply restrictions during the pandemic and rising demand for nuclear energy. And this means that all possible risks faced by Arizona residents extend far beyond its borders, into Wyoming and further into Utah, where yet another uranium boom has begun. Road of Fury. They're already here. They're among us. On July 30th, 2 trucks were spotted leaving the Canyon Mine. These trucks went on a 300-mile journey through northern Arizona and the Navajo Nation to the White Mesa Mill Factory in southern Utah, and the trucks are carrying radioactive uranium. It's expected that once fully up and running, 6 large haul trucks will make this trip every day. In 2012, the Navajo Nation passed a law banning the transportation of uranium through their reservation, yet trucks are still running despite the concerns and discontent of the native population. Moreover, the company Energy Fuels, which operates the uranium mine, claims that its activities pose no danger to people or nature. And anyway, uranium has been transported this way since the 80s, and so far no one's been harmed. Exposure as gift. Imagine going to a museum to check out artifacts and experience history, and you get a dose of radiation along with interesting information. And you don't even need to imagine this happening at the Grand Canyon Museum. According to a recent report from the Arizona Republic, for nearly 2 decades, people who visited this museum might have been unknowingly exposed to unsafe levels of radiation. It turns out they stored 3 5-gallon buckets of uranium ore from the museum's collections. And these buckets were kept in a room next to a taxidermy exhibit that was often visited by tourists. When they measured the radiation level next to the buckets, it was 13.9 milliroentgen per hour, 7 times the safe limit. It's assumed that initially the buckets were probably used as teaching tools to show geologists what uranium ore looks like, and then, well, someone forgot about them? I don't know. The good news is that people haven't been hugging or carrying these buckets for a long time, so the chance of getting radiation sickness or its effects is pretty low. But this whole situation still sounds like the backstory for some supervillain. You owe me a like. See you later.